Hello, everyone. I'm Tanya Rivero. Thank you for joining us. The federal government is now partially shut down, and CBS News has learned it is unlikely to end until late next week after Christmas. Joining me on the phone from Arlington, Virginia, is Zach Cohen. He's a Senate correspondent for National Journal. Zach, thank you so much for being with us. Remind us, how did we get to this point?
So President Trump, for months and even since his campaign for president back in 2016, has been asking for additional funding to fund a wall across the southern border with Mexico, arguing that that would help decrease the amount of illegal immigration that does come across that border. Earlier this year, appropriators did sign off on a $1.6 billion border security package, but Democrats backed away from that offer last week and offered only a continuing resolution with slightly less money after a meeting with the president, in which he promised to, quote, shut down the government for border security, and believed that he could sort of hold his own and try to get more money in these final days before a partial government shutdown. This, right now, midnight, is the deadline for about 25% of some discretionary spending that includes the Department of Homeland Security. And without Congress passing a continuing resolution to keep that funding has now lapsed, and that is mostly because the Congress and President Trump couldn't come to an agreement on a final figure for border security funding.
And what about a continuing resolution? Why could they not agree to sort of kick the can down the road, as it were?
So both the House and the Senate agreed to kick the can down the road in a form of continuing resolution. The difference being is that the House wanted to include about $5 billion in border security funding, which is what Trump has been asking for the last few days, as well as some disaster relief was thrown in there. And the Senate, a few days prior, had passed what was called a clean CR. It basically just says keep the government funding where it currently is. We'll come back to this later.
All right.
And the Senate was able to advance that a little bit, but didn't get to a final vote.
All right. So, Zach, do we have any idea when the shutdown will end? Do you have any insight into this?
It's unclear. So the Senate and the House did both adjourn today and won't come back until tomorrow at the earliest. The president and congressional leadership are meeting to hash out a deal. It could take several days. It may not even happen until the new Congress convenes January 3rd, a full week and a half from now. It remains to be seen whether the two sides, the Democrats and Republicans, Congress and Trump, can come to an agreement on a final spending package.
But the Senate is in session tomorrow. No one's going home yet for the holidays.
That's right. Senators who live maybe closer by will try to go spend Christmas with their families, but a couple of senators did try to go home earlier this week and had to fly back, some from as far away as Hawaii, when it was clear that another Senate vote would need to take place. So, yes, senators are still in town, congressmen are still in town, in the hopes that a final deal can be reached before Christmas.
I don't think too many Americans have a bunch of sympathy for the lawmakers, though, when there are, government workers going home to Christmas without paychecks at this point. So, Zach,
right.
Who do you think this shutdown hurts more politically, Republicans or Democrats?
We are a full 2 years from the next election, which would be in obviously 2020, when President Trump will be up for re-election, the entire House of Representatives and a third of the Senate, with the exception of a couple of governor races in 2019. There will be a full 2 years before voters sort of get a say in any of this. So it's hard to say that it will have really any political impact over the long term. Democrats like to point out that Trump did say that he would take credit for a shutdown, as we are now experiencing. Although the president has tried to turn that back on them by arguing Senate Democrats didn't vote for the continuing resolution from the House to fund border security, so really it's on them.
Right.
And this is what typically happens in a shutdown, and remains to be seen exactly what the long-term effect is.
And, of course, it's not surprising that most Americans, when polled, do not want a shutdown and want Congress to compromise so that doesn't happen. When Democrats take control of the House in January, Zach, do you expect more possible shutdowns to occur? I mean, we've been here before, and I would hate to think that this is becoming normalized.
We've had 3 shutdowns in the last 2 years under unified Republican government. So it is logical to conclude that when you have divided government where Democrats control the House, but Republicans will have the White House and the Senate, that, yes, more shutdowns and more political impasse could take place. Democrats have already said that when they come in, if the shutdown is still in place by January 3rd, they would pass a clean CR, something similar to what the Senate did. but then it'd be up to Trump to either sign it or veto it. And that kind of division can play out on any host of any other number of issues. And so it just remains to be seen exactly where they'll find bipartisan agreement on something like criminal justice reform, which did just pass Congress and was signed into law.
Right.
It's going to be a really fascinating 2 years.
Right. It was great to see that piece of bipartisan legislation make it into law. That is something that is so rare in this Congress. But I just want your take specifically on whether you think the idea of a shutdown as a political tool may be the new normal.
I think so far it has become more normal than it has been, and this is not something that has just happened in the last 2 years, but it's certainly become more common. It's worth remembering that the House and the Senate can do a few things by themselves and don't necessarily have to act together. The House has said it's going to start investigations into the executive cabinet and into President Trump himself. And that can happen without, obviously, consulting with the president or the Senate. And the Senate will continue to confirm judicial nominees, executive nominees, and that it can also do unilaterally. So plenty of business will still get done in Washington. Just a question of whether a shutdown will interrupt them from time to time.
Well, let's hope that lawmakers and the president get to work tomorrow and get this figured out. Nobody wants this to last very long. Zach Cohen, Thank you so much for joining us.
Anytime.